Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Christian Geyer. Christian, first of all, welcome. And thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you, Tom. I'm proud to be here. And as a listener, I have to take a moment to say how much I admire what you're doing across your platforms, the heart of compliance across the board, adventures in compliance. And honestly, as a once practicing certified fraud examiner, all things investigations provides hours of intriguing and insightful interviews. What you're promoting across your platforms is truly valuable. And I'm honored to be part of this conversation.
Thanks very much. Christian, could you tell our audience your professional background?
Yeah, so I would say leaving home in late 2001 and then returning in 2006, I found myself a 25-year-old trying to springboard my professional career. I transitioned into supporting government contracting and the intelligence community as an accounts payable clerk. Even then, I was looking to innovate using automation to speed up processes, which earned me promotions to staff accountant. But then what I basically realized was accounting wasn't for me. It was about finance, understanding how to drive companies forward. So from there, I transferred over to supporting the Navy and Marine Corps through the Office of Naval Research. During that time, I developed a data mining application that basically was adopted widely on through ONR, Office of Naval Research, which sparked my interest in basically leveraging data to drive efficiencies and innovation. That experience opened the door to a nonprofit sector, the Center for Naval Analyses. It's a sort of a government think tank where in 2012, I launched the FFRDC's first ever business analytics or data analytics group. And that role was kind of like a turning point in my career. The work gained recognition. It allowed me to sit and observe ONR's board discussions. That included the audit, risk, and finance committees, where I developed a deep understanding kind of like of how data informs decision making. And later, I sort of moved into the private sector, serving as the VP of Finance and Treasury for a group of companies, one of them including the Crypsis Group, which during my time, we transformed the company into a leader in incident response, which led to its eventual acquisition by Palo Alto in 2020. After that, sort of a week before COVID outbreak, I joined ActiveNav as their global CFO and COO, overseeing the global operations and financial strategy for their three operating companies spanning APAC, EMEA, and AMER. And I continue to serve on their board of directors today.
And the work you do, or let me actually just move over to Act Four. Could you tell us a little bit about the company and the services it provides?
I'm the founder and CEO of Act 4. What we are is a onshore software first approach powered by our patent pending technologies, where it enables the automated extraction of sensitive data. Basically, we simplify breach notification for cyber incidents. We help organizations quickly identify impacted individuals, facilitating timely and accurate notifications. All of our work being conducted securely within our Virginia Forensics Lab. We're providing a reliable, scalable solution that prioritizes speed, precision, data security, and we're setting a new standard in the industry. I'd say we just recently hit our 1,000th deployment last quarter. That's a huge milestone in just 23 months since our founding. And what we found is it's been quite a journey, and the way that we've come into an existence is kind of a story in itself.
Well, and that's a story I want to talk about because I want practitioners and professionals to understand how Act Four came into existence. But actually, what intrigues me is sort of the entrepreneurial component of what you guys have now, even coming out of an entrepreneurial company. So, could you tell us about that journey?
Well, okay. I mean, I've had sort of the spark of entrepreneurship throughout my career. I mean, it's leverages back to the ZP Group when we launched three companies, one of them being Crypsis, and then turning a company around from ActiveNav in their three operating groups. So it's really a passion of mine. But where it really started was in kind of late 2000, was it 2021, when my extended network reached out to us, basically stating the current affairs of breach notification list vendors. And when you look at or basically what I was hearing from countless people is that there were issues of gross inaccuracies in the individuals identified on a breach. Sensitive data elements were being missed, then long drawn out timelines, and then the prices vary drastically from one vendor to another and also one engagement to another. So the biggest concern that sort of stemmed out of this, everyone was bringing about was voicing the issue of constant cost increases So stakeholders were feeling like the notification list vendors were just bad actors themselves. Quite quoted prices were low to win the work. And then throughout the process, they would ask for more and more money along the way, which basically I liken it to a ransom. Is that these vendors would go low, win the deal, and then hike up the prices to then say, I'm going to deliver on that timeline if you give me more money. I would say from an entrepreneur standpoint, it's we're trying to find solutions within the market, great solutions or sort of something that disrupts the marketplace. So basically, with the feedback, I began dissecting how the service offering was performed back in 2021. And what we uncovered was that there's a vast majority of vendors that rely on manual processes and overseas labor. And this leads to delays, inaccuracies, and security risks. So I used that intel, and in sort of early to mid 2022, we launched Act 4. From the start, we focused on automation and software. It was about working every step of the solution or every step of the process to reduce manual efforts along the way. So we looked at more robust data collections, ensuring that we were capturing everything, but then also how do we drive speed through our software automation? Now, I would say what really demonstrated what that we had captured lightning in a bottle from an entrepreneur standpoint was that vendors, at least from my network, it was communicated that vendors would take 9 to 12 months to deliver on a breach notification list. And we were given our first sort of at bat with 1,000 endpoint deployment. It was 1,000 laptops that were breached, and it was 20 terabytes of data. They waited to the last minute or the last final days before penalties were going to be sort of given down. And they needed a vendor that could come in and process all that data. No one was giving, they couldn't find a vendor that, or the lawyer couldn't find a vendor that could actually meet their timelines. So they gave us an at bat. We actually deployed 6 software instances. And within the 5 days that they needed it, that's actually 9 days when you count weekends. But we had processed all 1,000 endpoints, gone through all 20 terabytes of data. And by that fifth business day, we had 100,000 plus individuals and patients identified within their environment and given a notification list so that they could meet their sort of compliance duties. It was what we had realized was lightning in a bottle. And that's where we are today.
Christian, this topic of notification of a data breach is being discussed literally at the highest levels of regulators, even in the form of the Securities and Exchange Commission. There was comments about that last week. But down to the business to business level, where if you're a vendor, a supply chain, or in the supply chain, a customer or other stakeholder, you're equally concerned about a notification. And there even another level of, I don't want to say introspection, but perhaps difficulty with various state laws, literally across the 50 states of the United States. And but I'd like to focus on the business to business. Is this something businesses are demanding from other businesses? Because my experience in compliance tells me when businesses start demanding a response, that's when a response happens. Certainly, there's a regulatory aspect to this, and a fine or penalty or other punishment can be a motivator. But if you can't do business with someone because you don't have a notification response plan in place, you may not be able to do business.
Yeah. So if you sort of pull together the 3 sort of line items that we actually deliver on, one being the notification list of individuals impacted, but then also ransomware justification. The final one is our business to business sort of line item, which our software, when you look at what AI can actually deliver on an incident, it's thematics or the uncovering of what type of data lies dormant in that environment, and it can be what other businesses you work with. So if you're talking about schematics for another business you're working on and you're the custodians of that, or it could be even sensitive data that you're holding as a custodian of other businesses. Maybe you're an MSP. What we actually provide is the ability to deploy our software in their environment and give them insights on other business data or other businesses' data that they're holding. So then they have contractual obligations. When you're working with another vendor or supplier, or maybe somebody from a business perspective where you're actually charging them for a service or solution, you could be holding data on them, but you have a sort of You have a requirement in their actual contract document to notify them of a breach. And at that point, they can ask, what was actually taken? What did you lose of mine? Now, historically, that had been just a manual review process to uncover what data has been stolen of not just an individual, but also a business. And what we're able to do is now fast track that and lower and decrease the actual time by up to 90% because of the actual adoption of software automation. And hopefully, when you look at the new analytics of how fast we're going, it'll drive state level requirements or even federal requirements on how fast you need to respond. Some of these state level specific requirements are up to a year to notify. And that's based on the decade old sort of process of manual reviewers. So then yeah, it makes sense. But now with our accelerated speed using automation software, states should actually think about how can we reduce that timeline to then put more pressure on these individuals or put more pressure on these companies to report accurately.
Kristen, could you detail for us what the where AI and machine learning come into the Act 4 process?
Yeah, so if you look at historically e-discovery as a solution, manual review or notification list stemmed out of e-discovery utilizes automation techniques like regular expression and keywords. So you're looking for the presence of things like social security number, date of birth in a document. And then historically, you would put that forward to a manual review process. You'd send those data that are the data that's responsive to those keywords. You'd send that out for a manual reviewer to actually look at. What we're doing with automation is actually looking, if you think about it, structured files are the easiest to automate because in a column and row format, what actually contents are sitting within there. If you look at title headers of a column, you know exactly what type of data is in there. If it's an SSN column, you know that SSNs are below it typically. Automation goes beyond just structured files, database files. It can go into semi structured files. And that's where we evolved back in 2 years ago. It was pretty much all structured files. And then our first added was how do you automate and utilize AI in semi structured files? Semi structured file automation is looking for key aspects within the document, structure within the document, and extracting it in a methodic manner. That was our first adage of going into semi-structured, but then the vast majority of data that's exfiltrated on an incident response is unstructured data. That specifically or on an eye level looks like it doesn't contain any structure to it. But surprisingly, what AI can actually do is it looks at the vast majority of files or every file within a data engagement and it looks for structure within those unstructured. Basically, if you can find like documents across the data estate, and it could be 10 documents, 1,000 documents, or 100,000 documents. If you can find every single file from an unstructured standpoint that looks identical, you've inherently found structure in it. And it's the learned structure that the AI can actually process and then extract those automated sort of data elements in that unstructured file. And that's what we're kind of doing is we're not just automating structured files, but we're going beyond and looking at how do you find the fingerprints of not just structured files, but unstructured files.
So, in the world of compliance I play in, it's anti-corruption compliance. And the regulators in our space are the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission. But the DOJ has really been leading the charge that compliance professionals in the anti-corruption space must have access literally to all data across every silo in an organization. Is the tool that you and your team are developing, could that at some point be used to help see or at least tap into those various data lakes of unstructured data?
Yeah. So what we're utilizing was historically a data governance tool. So that's not, there. These solutions are out there in the market that utilize regular expressions and keywords. It's how do you deploy a software solution from a data governance perspective? You have to have records managers internally to deploy that and then man that software. It's been around for some time, but there's no one actually putting down significant penalties or the requirement for adoption of data governance in a broad sense that's making everyone apply these tools. Our tool, I would say we've geared it specifically towards incident response, but that doesn't rule out its adoption further down the line on other sort of use cases. but there are tools out there that everyone should be looking at, board members included, understanding, are we actually implementing software solutions that understand our entire data estate? And then what do we do with that data? What do we do with those insights to remediate and lower our sort of our attack surface? So you have tools that can look at the metadata attributes of a file. You can look at the contents of the file. But then what you can do with the tools in the last sort of half decade is inject metadata labels into these files. Maybe you've identified with that software tool that it contains sensitive information. You should inject that with a sensitivity label. Let's call it Microsoft's O365 environment lends itself well to that. If you inject sensitivity labels, then it can be read by data loss prevention, DLPs. It can also be applied to IAMs, which then further secure your data. But then also you can actually take that further and use those data labels or those metadata attributes to then apply data retention policies to it. And a lot of these data governance tools out there will actually go out, seek and destroy data that's beyond the retention policies that you've built out. I would say the tools have been out there for some time. It's the adoption and the requirement to adopt those that needs to catch up.
It almost sounds to me that you can use data mining to not simply inform your privacy security regulatory framework, but also your overall compliance framework. Would that be a fair assessment of what I just heard?
I mean, it's a common thing for clients of ours post breach that they've received our data mining report that basically identifies every single file potentially if their entire data estate was exposed. We will provide a report of every individual by file, and they will typically use that report to then hone in on the large swaths of data in their environment that they can then either encrypt or delete. It is not uncommon for companies to utilize our reports beyond the actual incident itself. I mean, when you have data at your fingertips, to let it go unactioned is kind of, let's call it a crime in itself.
How about wasteful?
Yes, exactly.
So let me turn to the board of directors. My hope is that everyone on the board of directors understands the nature of the response to a data breach, but are you having these sort of more sophisticated conversations with board members now, or at least senior executives that, hey guys, it's not simply having the protocol in place and getting the information out, but it's actually using the information?
Yeah, let's call it. We generally pass our information along to the board members. A lot of the actual clients request us to build out presentation decks so that they can relay them and provide the information and findings that we have on our data mining engagements. Now, what I would say that's all useful information and that it's actionable at the board level. But from my eyes, the perspective needs to go beyond what they're doing with that data, or let's call it, it's great that when we're on an engagement, we can provide those insights, but what happens on engagements that we're not on? Now, I've heard countless sort of engagements on in the sort of cybersecurity world. More recently, one was we had a client that came to us asking if we could do their 2 million files, and we quoted them 6 weeks. The client ended up going with a vendor that quoted 4 weeks. That's great, but could they actually deliver on that? Come to find out that engagement lasted over 9 months. They had to bring in a second vendor. And at the end of the day, they were left with no deliverable at all. And they had to use what's commonly called as a broad notice. So they had to notify everyone that everyone was impacted. They didn't know exactly what was taken. So what's important from a board perspective, in my eyes, is understanding at a time of sort of crisis, who the executives or who the company is engaging when they're trying to combat these firefights. You need to almost ask those difficult questions as, I know, slow down. Have we actually used the most ethical and compliant fashion to vet out these vendors? And I think that's the critical step that's needed here is a lot of vendors or a lot of companies will choose a vendor because they have a brand behind them, but have they looked under the hood to understand how is that service offering being delivered? Is it offshore labor? or is it through automation? And I think that's going to go a long way in the future for board members to understand and press those sort of demanding questions of their executives, is trying to understand, have they vetted those vendors that are actually providing these capabilities? Because beyond just the incident response, there's a whole host of downstream dominoes that they can use to say, are we using this data that we found in a compliance and governance fashion?
Christian, you've used a phrase, or at least your firm uses a phrase I wanted to ask you, and that's the reverse domino effect. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, yeah, I think of it as kind of like the ripple effect in a pond, or some people call it the butterfly effect. Dominoes, if you have a line of dominoes and you knock one over, it's going to hit the next one. If you think of multi-branch dominoes, one domino can lead to several extra branches. When you think about what you can do from an incident response standpoint, incident response, they generally look to cut off the threat actor and then stop the next domino from falling. From a data mining perspective, what we're looking to do is reverse the dominoes. How do you stand back up those dominoes that have fallen? So, one way is to use those data insights that we've identified and remediate the problems and get ahead of the actual issues at hand. If I were to state, there's two use cases I can potentially think about, or two cases that I know of that sort of identify this pretty clear and present. One of which was a vendor that, or a client that engaged us immediately after they paid a ransom. So they didn't know that we actually provided ransom determinations. They paid a ransom thinking that they had lost significant amounts of sensitive data. And what we were able to do is we went into their environment, scanned it, and found that the threat actor got away with just blank logs. They had no sensitive data. The client ended up paying 5 million in ransom. If they had dropped us in there earlier, like this other client, which this other client was breached, they're a global company. We actually dropped software instances all across the world, one in Asia, one in the US, and one in the UK, and basically scanned their entire environment. Within the first 30 minutes, we uncovered a file that had over 400,000 individuals from the Philippines and their sensitive data. They were looking at a ransom payment. The actual threat actor gave them 5 days to respond. And we showed them that you had significant swaths of sensitive data out there in the wild. And they were able to use the data insights that we provided to then pay that ransom, get that information from ever being sort of displayed on the dark web, get that pulled back. And they are looking to re-stand up those dominoes, pull them back and regain the trust. And that's what we're looking at, is how do you drive true action? And then how do you recover from potential, let's say, future incidents? How do you recover from future dominoes from falling utilizing data insights?
Kristen, let me change the focus just a little bit to ask you, what are some of the key differences in your mind on the US versus EU data transfers and data transfers?
It's a tricky one, and kind of, it's going to make me sound like I'm not a fan here of the US. But when you look at, in my eyes, like the US is trying to play a catch up game. We're trying to catch up to the rest of the world. When you look at GDPR, it's been around for a number of years. And when you look at the cross border data transfers, GDPR sort of requires justifications for any cross border data transfer. You have to provide, why are you engaging with another vendor overseas or in another country? You have to provide justification as to, you can't find that service in house or in region, to then say, I have to go outside of the country to find a vendor that can process our data, that can do this. This, let's say GDPR isn't the only one. There are other countries that have this similar sort of requirement. It's because they're looking to sort of secure their citizens' data, their sensitive data of their consumers. I think in the future, data mining could actually be used to drive the insights on how much data is out there. And then also, how do we prevent, or what can we do in region that doesn't need to be transferred out? I can understand the need for data transfers a decade ago when everything was labor driven and the cost of labor overseas is significantly less than that what we have at home. But in today's data mining world, or data automation and AI, we can actually drive down the cost at home versus and make it comparable, almost pennies difference to what's being sought overseas in a labor market.
To ask you to maybe turn your head down the road a little bit to, dare I say, mid-century at 2030. I just love that phrase. Never thought I'd live to see mid-century in the 21st century, but where do you see your arena in 2030 and perhaps even beyond, Christian?
Yeah, so if I look at what strives we've or achievements we've made in the last 2 years, if I were to fast forward to mid to late 2030, I almost see the industry basically moving towards a nearly fully automated breach response, specifically in data mining, with AI driving real time threat analysis, almost reporting in the moment, because how fast we're able to process terabytes of data, how we're able to automate and extract that information across structured data all the way to unstructured. It's just a matter of time on the greater adoption of this tool or of tooling from automation and AI into every engagement and potentially even in a proactive manner. So I almost see what we're gonna realize is stricter regulations worldwide and forcing companies to almost provide real-time data analytics on breach responses, and then also providing fast delivery times on what is breach notifications today. It's not going to be a month-long drawn out process. It's going to be days.
It really seems like with your descriptions, the data mining, let me restart this one. I'm hearing a unified approach to risk management utilizing data. We're today sort of focusing on incident breach response, but I also heard you talk about once you have that data captured, that's at your fingertips to use. And if you don't, as I believe you said, it's almost a crime not to use it. But it strikes me that we're really moving towards a much more unified way in the overall risk management. Have I gone too far with that?
So unified risk management, I would say we're catching up again. If you're on the committee, risk committee, and I would say if you're looking at the four quadrant risk map, and data governance or data handling, sensitive data identification isn't on the top right of your quadrant, then somebody internally is kind of lying to you. What we should be using is the metrics today, the data sort of understanding that we have today through data governance tooling to then be proactive. Too often I use the adage, it's not if, it's when. So people tend from a data governance perspective or security perspective, they look to always secure the windows and doors. They don't actually look at the contents of the data in their house. How do you secure the information behind your four walls, underneath your roof? They always look to say, can I put another padlock on the door? Can I put a lock on the window? Can I put a motion detector in the house? But they don't look to say, how can I utilize the insights that we can get today fairly quickly to then secure the information, categorize it, and organize it inside the house. Once it's organized, categorized, you can then apply encryption methods or you can apply identity access management tools to it. So then it prevents or it limits your attack surface. I think sort of that's where we need to go. I think that when I talk about crime, it's or waste, as you put it, it's how do we use the analytics of today to then get smarter about our security? And it goes well beyond just securing the doors and windows. And I think that's where people need to look toward.
Christian, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to connect with you or find out more about Act 4, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
Yeah, so you can visit our website, act4.com. We also have our resources page that talks about all of our sort of engagements, case studies, you can leverage data analytics, data mining. But then I also suggest reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me, and I'm happy to talk about the future of data mining and cybersecurity.
Chris and I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Yeah, I love it, Tom. Thank you.